It's here, the time of year that is everyone's favorite of all. The heat from the summer was really a bummer, but now it's time for fall. Well, almost. What's growing on, gardeners? Poetry's not really my thing, but gardening is. And on today's video, I'm going to share with you 32 of the best vegetables that you can plant in September right now for the most beautiful fall garden of your life. Fall may still be a few weeks away, but fall gardening season starts now.
If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and check out my Amazon store and Spreadshop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom apparel and gear.
No matter where you live, you should be able to grow the overwhelming majority of crops featured in this video in September. However, depending on how cool or warm your zone is, it may dictate how you have to start most of these crops. For example, I live on the southeastern coast of North Carolina, zone 8B, and where I live, it's still going to be pretty warm for the next 30 to 45 days or so. So for that reason, most of the crops in this video that I feature, I'm going to start as transplants indoors because it's still a little bit too hot in my garden to start many of these directly from seed. However, if you live in a much cooler zone than I do, you may have the flexibility to plant almost all of these things directly in your garden now. So please keep that in mind. Most of the crops in this video aren't going to like prolonged temperatures in the 80s or warmer. So if you're going to have a lot of those days remaining left in the season, maybe start what you can indoors in transplant trays and then transplant them out either in the end of September or at some point in early October once it cools down. Over the course of this video, I will be featuring many different crops, and I will also be sharing a lot of the seed packets that I use personally to plant out in my garden. If you're curious about what those varieties are and you want to grow what I am growing, I will place direct links to all of them that I possibly can down in the video description for your convenience. Veggie number one is one of my favorite fall crops, and that is peas. And when I say peas, I mean shelling peas, snap peas, and snow peas. They are all pretty much interchangeable. Now, peas are one of the easiest things that you can possibly grow out in your fall garden because they are both frost tolerant and they require very little fertilizer. So once you direct sow these into your ground and you just give a little bit of 5-5-5 fertilizer after you direct sow the peas, there isn't really much that you need to do aside from make sure they get enough irrigation. And within, depending on the days to maturity, you should be harvesting peas within 2 to 3 months. Now, one thing that you need to know about peas, aside from the fact that you should be direct sowing them, they're really not the most efficient transplanting kind of plant, so I recommend the direct sowing. The other thing that you need to know about them is the pea plants themselves are pretty hardy towards a frost and freeze, but the pea pods are not. So if you get a hard frost or freeze and they are forming the pods, they often crack and split. So if you plant these peas directly out into your garden now and everything is trucking along and you're about to get your harvest, but you have an early frost or freeze coming in, please cover them with a frost blanket or a tarp to keep that frost off of them. That will help protect your fruits so you don't lose your peas to that frost damage. Crops 2 through 11 are many of our favorite fall vegetables that we associate with fall gardening, and those are our cabbage-related brassicas. And when I say cabbage-related brassicas, I specifically mean bok choy, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, collards, kale, kohlrabi, mustard greens, and rapini, also known as broccoli rabe. Now, the reason why I lumped all of these plants together in a single category is because they can mostly all be traced back to a common ancestor. In fact, this might blow your mind, but broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, and Brussels sprouts, they're all the exact same species. They are all just manipulations of the wild mustard plant. Over countless generations, human beings have been saving seed from the wild mustard plant that slightly express different traits. And over generations of seed saving, we were able to develop strains that just manipulate the plant and express different things, like the florets and the leaves and other terminal buds buds and things like that. But all of those plants are actually the exact same species. There's no real difference. They're just expressing a different part of the wild mustard plant. And this is very important because all of those plants will thrive under the same conditions, since at the end of the day, they are basically the same plant. Now, the wild mustard plant can be traced back ancestrally to coastal areas of Britain and France. So it adapted to grow in a very narrow temperature range. It would want to be in temperatures of basically 55 to 65 degrees at all times. So the plant, because of where it originated from, is very sensitive to warm temperatures, and all of your brassicas are highly prone to bolting as a result. Days in the mid-70s or 80s can quickly cause your little tiny plants to send up shoots and bolt and go to seed on you. So if you want to start your brassicas now and it's still going to be warm out for quite some time, do what I do and string some shade cloth overhead, because that will help prevent the brassicas from bolting. If you don't have a system to hang shade cloth overhead with steel cables like I do, you can just build yourself a little hoop house like I have right here and just drape the shade cloth over top. These are just PVC pipe from the plumbing aisle in Home Depot, nothing fancy. I'll make sure to link to a video above and down in the video description if you want to build yourself a little hoop structure like I have. It will also doubly pay off for you in the winter, because you can extend your harvest by switching out the shade cloth with agricultural fabric to keep the frost off the plant for a longer growing season. So for me personally, I'm going to start all of my brassicas in seed trays indoors now, because it's still a little bit too warm outside for them, and then in about 5 to 6 weeks they will be ready for transplanting outdoors when it will be a lot cooler. If we get some kind of late season heat wave, I will just use the shade cloth to my advantage. If it's going to be cool for the rest of the fall, they should be fine without any protection. Veggies 12 through 19 that you can plant right now in September are your cold-tolerant root vegetables, and that I mean specifically beets, carrots, daikon, parsnips, radishes, turnips, rutabagas, and Swiss chard. But unlike the brassicas that I just mentioned, all of the veggies in this list of root vegetables should be direct sown in your garden. Root crops, as a general rule, do not like being transplanted because that root itself doesn't want to be disturbed once it germinates. And while it is technically possible to transplant a root vegetable, usually you will get very poor root development if you do so. For example, transplanted carrots are notorious for having messed up looking roots that either grow cockeyed or zigzagged, or they split, or they turn into doubles. They're just deformed. So please don't do it. Make sure that you direct sow all of your root vegetables. Now, the good thing about the root vegetables is they tend to be both more heat tolerant and cold tolerant than your brassicas that I just mentioned, for the most part. There are some exceptions, but things like, say, carrots, for example, they can take the heat of the summer in most regions, and they can also take temperatures to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe even a little bit colder in some areas. So don't be afraid, no matter where you live for the most part, to direct sow all of those root vegetables listed right now in your garden. Crops 20 and 21 are your non-bulbing alliums, leeks, and bunching onions. And it's very important that I insert the phrase non-bulbing here, because these are not like your standard onions and shallots that we harvest for the bulb. You see, your onions and shallots that we harvest for the bulb are very sensitive to day length. So they actually need to reach maturity in the late spring, early summer, when day length is maximum, because it is that long day length that actually triggers bulbing and you get those nice big bulbs. What makes bunching onions and leeks different is that they don't really bulb on the bottom, and we actually harvest the whole thing and eat the entire thing above the little root section. So because of that, they are day length agnostic, and most people can grow them all year round. What you must understand about growing bunching onions and leeks is that there are both winter standing varieties that are extremely cold tolerant, and there are summer standing varieties that handle heat better. Now, most every variety of leek or bunching onion is going to be cold hardy to at least 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you live in zone 7 or warmer like I do, you can just get yourself an all-purpose leek and bunching onion that does well in the spring and the summer, and you can grow that all throughout the year. I like to succession varieties of leeks, King Richard and Dawn Giant, because it does great all year round here in Zone 8, as well as Scarlet Bandit bunching onions. So basically every 3 to 4 months I can sow a few seed trays and plant out a couple dozen of each, and then I can harvest them perpetually every single season throughout the year. Now, if you live in a very cold zone, this is when growing leeks and bunching onions become a little bit more complicated. You want to get yourself a winter standing variety of leeks and bunching onions. So for example of some winter standing varieties of each, you can get the leeks Bandit, Giant Musselburgh, or Oslo, and you can get the bunching onions Evergreen, Long White, and Ramrod. All of these are winter standing varieties that can take extreme cold in your garden, provided they reach peak maturity before the super cold comes in. So if you live in a very cold climate and you want leeks and bunching onions all winter long, what you want to do is get yourself some seed starting trays, and you want to start the seeds now. Then transplant them out to your garden in about 6 weeks or so, and then get as much maturity as possible on them while it is still warm enough in the late summer, early fall. And then you want them to reach roughly maturity before the really hard frosts and freezes begin, because once they reach that maturity, your days are going to become so cold and the day length is going to become so short that they're not really going to grow anymore, and the mature leeks and bunching onions are going to be able to stand in your garden all winter long, even through snowpack, like a giant outdoor refrigerator. So what you will do is anytime you want to harvest them, you will just go outside and then you will pick them as necessary. The leeks you'll pull up and you'll eat the entire leek except for the root at the bottom. And then your bunching onions, you'd harvest them as spring onions or green onions, where you will just snip off the greens and chop them up and use them in dishes. And then they will continue to grow back when it warms back up. Crops 22 and 23 that you should plant right now in September are your warm season lettuces and your warm season spinaches. And this is very important that you understand that there are both warm season lettuce and spinach and cool season lettuce and spinach. As the name implies, your warm season lettuces and spinaches are going to be less prone to bolting and turning bitter in warm temperatures. And for the overwhelming majority of people right now, it is still much too warm to plant the really cold hardy lettuces and spinaches. So for example, now is the time to grow your heat tolerant romaine varieties. I love this Giant Caesar. It does great here in the spring and in the late summer to early fall. And you want to get yourself a nice bolt resistant variety of spinach, something like this Bloomsdale Longstanding. Longstanding in this case means that it is more bolt resistant, because if you were to plant your cold tolerant winter lettuces and spinaches right now, they would more than likely bolt and turn bitter on you anywhere except for the most cold zones in the world. So for example, this is a variety of red leaf lettuce called Red Sails. These ruffled red lettuces are extraordinarily cold hardy, and they do great here out in my garden all winter long. But if I were to plant this right now, they would bolt on me very quickly and they would become bitter in short order because it is way too warm yet. I can't plant something like this actually out in my garden until probably the middle part of November, and then have them grow into December and January when it's going to be nice and cool, because these plants are very sensitive to bolting and bittering. So please make sure you know the difference between your warm season and your cool season lettuces and spinaches. Crops 24 through 28 that you can plant right now in September are your annual herbs, parsley, dill, cilantro, chives, and basil. Now, let's play the game one of these is not like the others. Basil doesn't necessarily fit into this category exactly, because all of the other herbs are very frost hardy and can tolerate cold temperatures, whereas basil is frost sensitive. So let me break these two categories down for you one by one. Let's start with the cold-tolerant herbs: chives, cilantro, dill, and parsley. All of these can tolerate a hard freeze. Some are more cold-hardy than others. Your dill, for example, is hardy to the low 20s. Parsley is hardy to about 10 degrees. Cilantro is so outrageously cold-hardy, I've never found its limit. I think it can take 0 degrees Fahrenheit or maybe even colder. But all of these plants are quite susceptible to bolting. So for that reason, at least where I live, I can't really grow these things out in my garden throughout throughout the summer. Something like cilantro is so incredibly prone to bolting, I can't even grow that in the second half of March. It gets too warm. So I actually look forward to this time of year because I can finally grow these things standing all throughout the winter again. Now, all of these things you could either direct sow or you could sow them as transplants. I've had great success doing all of them. I think it's a little bit easier to direct sow them because you can cut down on a step. So personally, if it were me, I would direct sow these things into my garden now. If it's still a little bit too warm out for something like cilantro, you can start them indoors. That way you can keep them from bolting and transplant them out in about a month when the temperatures come down a little bit more. Alternatively, you could start them under shade cloth. Basil is a little bit of a different animal. It is highly susceptible to cold damage, so any frost or freeze will kill your basil plants. The reason why you can still grow these in September is because they germinate in only a matter of about 3 days in warm soil, and within about 30 days, the plants will be big enough that you can start picking off of them. But the real reason why I want you to start basil right now is I want you to begin these inside a container, because these are the ultimate crop to overwinter inside a container in your house. Basil needs almost no light to grow. In fact, if you go into your local grocery store right now, go into the produce department, I bet that you will see a ton of live basil plants that are thriving underneath just fluorescent lighting. And while fluorescent lighting isn't enough to make the basil plants grow, it is enough to keep them alive and hold them in stasis. So if you can give them a very sunny window, or maybe something like a supplemental grow light inside your house, they'll grow all winter long, and you can harvest fresh basil throughout the winter. So for that reason, I either want you to start some out in your garden right now if it's going to be at least 2 months before your first frost, or start some in a container right now if you're going to have frost at some point in October. That way you can bring it indoors and enjoy fresh basil all winter long. Crops 29 through 31 that you can start from seed in September right now are your bitter leaf vegetables, escarole, endive, and radicchio. And all of these things, in my opinion, are grossly underrepresented in the garden. Let's start with radicchio. If you've ever bought bagged salad mix before, you'll notice that in a lot of them there is this streaked white and purple vegetable that is very, very delicious when it is young and crisp. That is radicchio. So this is exceptionally cold hardy, and it doesn't take a lot of solar energy to grow. So if you live in a location that has really dreary winters and you don't get a lot of solar energy, this is something that you can plant now, and it will continue to grow throughout the winter because it doesn't need a whole lot of energy to grow. Your escarole and your endive is a little bit different. This is a bitter green vegetable that's kind of similar to collards in a way, but they are not brassicas. They are awesome in soups and stews. So if you've ever had something like Italian wedding soup, you've probably had escarole before. That's usually the green that they put in that. Or even things like pasta fazool. You can put your escarole, your endive in that. All of these are great soup and stewing greens, and they are very cold hardy, and they are very good for you. So if you want something that is new and exciting and delicious for soup and stew season, I highly recommend you give these things a chance. And crop number 32 that you can start right now in September is honestly just being added to the list because it would have looked really weird to end the list at 31. That's just kind of a weird number. And that is arugula, also known as rocket. And the reason why this is a little bit questionable is because not everybody may be able to grow this with great success right now because it's actually too warm in a lot of locations. Arugula is very prone to bolting on you. It's very sensitive to heat. So you would sprinkle this over your soil. You only need to cover it with about 1/8 of an inch of soil, water it in really well, and then in a matter of days you will have germination and a carpet of arugula starting to grow on you. But if it is still pretty warm and you're regularly getting temperatures in the 70s or warmer, you will likely have it bolt on you in short order. Now this is still going to be growable in most locations because you can still pick it before it bolts, but locations where it is consistently cool are going to have this stand in their garden a lot longer because arugula is harvested like a cut and come again. You let it grow to the point where it's about 2 or 3 inches tall. You would kind of chop it with a pair of scissors and level it down to about 1 inch, and then in about another week it will be ready for harvest again. And when the temperatures are cool, this system works great because you get nice even growth. But when the temperatures are warm, you'll see the central stem, it kind of bolts on you and develops seed tops, and you don't really want to eat that. Now the good news is you can get arugula seed for really cheap. So you can buy a couple of packets, sprinkle it as you need it, and if it bolts on you, no problem. You can just start another crop because this stuff germinates in no time flat, and it grows in no time flat. And this is one of those things that is going to be fantastic for growers with very cold winters but don't get a lot of snowpack and still have visible soil that they can grow in, because this needs almost no light to grow. So if you have an issue with short overcast days, you can probably still grow arugula. If you live in a location that gets a lot of snow, this is also another thing that you can grow in a pot up against your house or even indoors on your windowsill. This is sort of like basil. You can grow it inside on a sunny window. You can grow it underneath a grow light. It does not take a lot of energy for this to grow. So although in really warm locations it may not do great right now in your garden, you can grow it indoors, you can grow it in containers, you can grow it underneath shade cloth, or you can just hold off and wait until it gets nice and cooler if you're in a warm zone. And that right there are 32 veggies that you can plant in September right now for the most beautiful fall garden of your life, as well as some helpful tips and tricks that you can employ along the way to maximize your success growing the veggies. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that notification bell so you're notified when I release more videos like these. For any of the seed packets and varieties that I featured in this video, I will do my best to link to as many of them as possible down in the video description. For all of the products that I use in real life in my garden to help me grow vegetables, I have them all linked in my Amazon storefront. So if you expand the video description, you click on the Amazon storefront link, you'll see everything I use in real life. And while you're down there, please check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video.
Dale's mom had to leave on her first work trip in about a month, and Dale has been so Dale-pressed ever since. She left yesterday morning, and he's been curled up in a ball, mad at the world, so upset the entire time. Dale is a total mama's boy, and she's going to be away for a whole week, unfortunately, and Dale knows it. So please, everybody, drop some hearts down in the comments section below for Dale, because he's going through major mommy withdrawal. But that's okay, we'll be able to cheer him up later, because we are about to go on our WALK, and that always gets Dale up no matter how upset he is. Right, buddy? He loves his WALKS.